We are now starting the poetry unit, which is going to be interesting to do in a strictly online environment. Um, Normally, we would be in the classroom and have lots of discussions about this, so we're going to do our best as we go through. This is the introduction to poetry. So just what is poetry and why do we study it? Why do we study poetry? A lot of people think that um, first of all, they don't get poetry. Poetry is just kind of dumb. Other people say that poetry is amazing, but studying it ruins it. Um, the whole thing is that poetry is a masterful use of the language, and that if you can really read these poems and get the full meaning out of them, you are a master of language. And it's going to be very difficult for people to take advantage of you, try to trick you. You'll understand the world in a whole new way. Um, with poetry, the poets really work hard to basically minimize things. Understand that poetry and music are very closely related. That they both grew out of the same tradition. I think music came first, and we don't know for sure because we didn't have written records yet. But the theory is that music came first, and poetry, or lyrics as we might call them, came very quickly, shortly behind that. Now understand that poets really condense meaning a lot into these things, so that there is a lot of meaning in a poem. We're going to get to that a little bit more later. Now, getting back to the origins of poetry, understand that before we had writing, of course we had stories, we had information and things that we wanted to retain, but they changed from one person to the next. You know how that goes. If you tell one person something and then you tell somebody else, by the time it gets back to you, it's changed. Um, you tell a joke and you hear it again later from somebody else and it's slightly different. Fact, it's hard to keep the story right. People change it based on what they focused on, what they thought was more interesting, and this is especially difficult when you're trying to retain facts, when you want to keep things authentic, because people forget details, or they, because of bias, will change it deliberately. So we needed to come up with a way to make it easier to remember things, and that's where poetry comes in. In order to memorize, if you've ever tried to memorize something, it's not easy. Memorization is hard. Some people find it easier than others. Those people usually become actors or politicians or such. But for most of us, memorization is hard. Ancient civilizations that did not have writing had certain individuals whose whole job it was just to remember the history of their tribe, the history of their people. And the easiest way to remember that was to put it to music, or just to make it rhyme. Rhythm and rhyme make things a lot easier to remember. So, adding these things, they could remember their stories so much better. Remember the entire history of their people for thousands of years. They could remember this because it rhymed. You probably remember the lyrics to dozens of songs. I'm sure that you sing along all the time when nobody's looking. So, it's proof positive that we remember music so much easier. This is how poetry developed, was that originally it was put to music, and then we start realizing, well, we don't always have to have the music to make this work. So over time, poetry becomes an art, and instead of just being used to remember the history of things, the way things were, it also becomes a way to start, well, in some cases, protests, some cases just to discuss complex thoughts and ideas, and mostly, though, to express personal feelings. A lot of emotion gets expressed in poetry. Poetry was often used also to woo a woman's heart. The easy way to seduce a woman, sorry to put it this way, but it was used that way, was to use poetry, and they were so impressed. Oh, this person is so educated, so artistic, he's so sophisticated. Oh, women just swooned for men who could do poetry. Nobles also would sponsor poets as a way of displaying their wealth. Wealthy people would sponsor artists of all types, musicians, painters, sculptors, architects, and of course poets, and playwrights. And this is a way of saying, look at me, I am so wealthy that I am making the world a better place by having these people here, and I pay them to do nothing but create these beautiful things. And the nobles competed with each other to have the best artist, the best poet, the best playwright. Now, the invention of the printing press eliminated the need to memorize. So poetry at that point becomes primarily an art form. It's no longer a necessary part of society. Because, you don't have to memorize, you go out and buy the book. You can have the book right there on hand for quick, easy reference. And while today we still do have professional poets, poetry is more often found in advertising, in the theater, and of course musical entertainment. Example of poetry in advertising, McDonald's used to have this advertising campaign that went, "You deserve a break today, so get up and get away to McDonald's." So I repeat, why do we study poetry? Because if you can understand what these poets are trying to say, if you can analyze that language, if you can pull all the depth of meaning that they have spent days putting into it, and trust me, the poets do work very hard to compact meaning into these poems. If you can unravel this, if you can find deeper thought, deeper ideas in here, if you understand how to pull a poem apart, you become a master of language, and people are less likely to trick you, less likely to fool you with things. If you've ever dealt with a slick salesman, if you ever have to buy a house, or like we're showing here, a used car, there are so many ways people try to fool you. And if you understand how language is used, you realize how they're manipulating the language to try to trick you. So this just makes you wiser and more equipped to deal with the world. Now, come on, go away. So now we're going to look at actually some tools that poets use. If you ever have to do an analysis essay, your teacher is going to provide you with the tools you need to analyze. Well, guess what I'm doing here? I'm providing you with the tools you need to analyze a poem. Right? Here we have two wonderful cartoons, a Far Side poem, the cows, the Far Side. Gary Larson was obsessed with cows with glasses. The distant hills call to me, the rolling waves seduce my heart. Oh, how I want to graze in their lush valleys. Oh, how I want to run down their green slopes. Alas, I cannot. Damn the electric fence. Damn the electric fence. Or Savage Chickens by Doug Savage. Chicken, road, the crossing is within. There is no other side. Now, they're making fun of poetry, but still, you can see that the same elements are there. All poems have a form, some sort of format, a way of setting them up. Often it's a certain number of lines, a certain number of syllables per line, a certain rhyme scheme that's set up. But it can also be done in a way to convey an image, like John Hollander has done here, where he has arranged the words to create the image of a swan swimming on a pond, and you get the swan's reflection in the pond. So form is just, it's nothing more than how a poem is organized. Meter. I am not going to ask you to do meter. This is some hard stuff, and to tell the truth, I still have trouble with it. But meter is the rhythm of a poem. It's the beat. The number of syllables per line and which syllables are accented. They probably don't teach this anymore, but words that have multiple syllables in them, we accent one of those syllables. Accent meaning we put emphasis on one syllable. Like the word syllable, we accent the second syllable. Syllable. Now if we did this syllable, sounds funny. Syllable, it's just... So depending on what we accent changes how we pronounce the word. Now, knowing that and this also works in a sentence, when you put certain words together, we have a tendency to accent certain words over others. So that's all meter is the poet has put these words together so that they've established a rhythm, a beat based on which words and syllables you will naturally put emphasis on. Rhyme is just simply the repetition of the same or similar sounds. Usually at the end of a line, but sometimes we also get rhyme inside a line. It's called internal rhyme. We'll see that a lot in Poe. A ballad is simply a short narrative poem. Narrative meaning it tells a story. They're often romantic and musical in nature. This particular one, Get Up and Bar the Door, is funny. It's from the Middle Ages, so you're going to read it and go, this is hard to understand, because it's in an older form of English. Blank verse just means there's no rhyming going on. It still has meter, a beat to it. It still has a certain order to a certain number of syllables per line. It'll have other forms going on in there. The end of the lines don't rhyme. Couplet just means that 2 lines in a row rhyme. Doggerel is what they consider trivial and badly written verse, often humorous, which means that it doesn't mean that it's really all that bad. It just means that the poet didn't put a lot of work into it, that often they're doing it for a sense of humor, that there's a little joke going on there. They want to get a smile out of you. An elegy is a poem of lament or grave meditation. Okay, so elegy literally is often read at graves. This is often about death, about horrible things that have happened, usually about war. So these are just the opposite of doggerel. They are meant to be taken very seriously, and they are grim often. This particular one by Mary Elizabeth Fry, she's making a comment on people who go to funerals and hang around in cemeteries. She's saying, hey, don't go to my grave. Don't be upset when you see that tombstone there. I'm not there anymore. That's just my body, which is turning to dust. I've moved on. So don't stand here crying. You move on with your life too. Okay. An epic. These are those huge poems. You may have read them in senior year in high school. The Odyssey is often the one that you have to deal with, by Homer, where Odysseus travels from island to island trying to get home. Other major epics are the Aeneid by Virgil, Beowulf, Paradise Lost by Milton, the Song of Hiawatha by Longfellow, and there are many, many more. It's amazing as that they didn't have written form yet, and these men memorized these long, long poems, and then went from tavern to tavern singing sections of them for their evening supper. An epitaph is just simply a short poem meant to be put on a tombstone. So, like if you were to go to Boot Hill, I think it's in Arizona or is it New Mexico? I forget now where it is. But if you go to Boot Hill out in the west, it's a cemetery where a lot of cowboys are buried. And there's some actually pretty funny things put on there. He died with his boots on. And I forget what the rhyme is to that one, but things like that. Here lies Jake, he was bit by a snake. Stuff like that. Free verse means it breaks all the rules. Doesn't have to rhyme, doesn't have to have meter or a beat to it, doesn't even have to have consistent lines. Like here, E. E. Cummings was famous for using free verse, for shifting things all over the place. Usually he does it for a particular visual effect. This one is particularly supposed to make you feel like you're moving forward, then you're moving back, and then you're moving forward again. Almost like you're riding a horse. Lyric is just what it sounds like. It's musical. It's meant to give you the feeling of music playing in the background. When you read this, it should sound like you're reading the lyrics to your favorite song. Ode. I'm not real fond of odes. Odes are a form of lyric poem that enthusiastically praises a certain thing, and they go on forever. And to tell you the truth, I don't get that excited about Grecian urns or nightingales or whatever. It'd be different if you were doing an ode to your lover or to someone really important or something like that. But no, they pick things that, like, really, how did this, and you see how many stanzas we have here. And by the way, a stanza is just one group of rhyming lines, or a group of lines, period. They're like a paragraph. So each stanza would be like a paragraph in the poem. This is just the first part of this poem. This poem goes on for pages. How do you come up with that much to say about this urn in a poem? He really loved this urn. Sonnet is a particular organization of lines and rhymes. Typically, well, to be a sonnet, it has to be a 14-line poem. Now, the rhyme scheme can change depending on the different poet. This is the Shakespearean sonnet that I have shown to you here. And by the way, this is how they express rhyme scheme. The rhyming words A and A, time and prime, night and white, leaves and sheaves. So you see how we go down like this. So but the thing is, A could pop up again later somewhere in the poem. If we have another rhyme for time, it could pop up again down here. So this is how we just show the rhyme scheme, that it's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, but it could be A, B, A, B, C, A, C, A, things like that. So it's just how people who analyze poems organize things. I'm not sure why it all bounced out in that weird shape like it did instead of staying closer to the end. Anyway. But the typical Shakespearean sonnet has sets of 4 lines, 3 sets of 4 lines, and then a couplet at the end. But there's also the Shavian sonnet and I think Knowlton. Was it Knowlton? Oh, I forget now. But there's several other types of sonnets out there. Pastoral. There was a period of time where we were just starting to really build up the cities. We're not quite into the Industrial Revolution yet. This is before the Civil War. But in Europe and in America, we were realizing that we've kind of gotten away from nature, and that we've forgotten. Part of this was because of the British and Europeans were starting to colonize the world, and they were seeing these quote-unquote primitive cultures like the Native Americans, and they looked at them and said, these people are in touch with Mother Nature. They're in touch with the earth. They haven't lost track of the important things in life. They haven't gotten carried away by money and possessions. And so pastorals were really in praise of the simpler life, and they often looked at shepherds, young boys who had to live in the field with sheep, as being the perfect example of how to live the perfect life, the innocent life, the way God intended us to be in the Garden of Eden. And if you were to ask any of those shepherds, they say, I don't want to be out here freezing with a bunch of sheep. I want to go inside where it's warm. Right. This is the important stuff we're about to go over now. These are the tools that I'm going to want you to use when I'm going to ask you to analyze a poem. And yes, you're going to have to analyze a poem. Boo, hiss. Okay. Alliteration and assonance. They're just simply the repetition of sounds. Alliteration is a consonant sound. Assonant is a vowel sound. So assonance would be A, E, I, O, or U. Everything else is considered alliteration. So poets use this in a certain reason. They're using this alliteration to give a feeling. They want you to come up with some thought. They may use a lot of hard sounds. D, k, b, p, because they're trying to get a certain feeling. They want you to feel maybe that this is harsh or hard. Or they may use softer sounds. Ch, s, woo, to make you feel more, maybe get a wind feeling or something like that. This particular story, Emily Dickinson doesn't want to tell you who the narrow fellow is. She wants you to figure it out from the hints that she's giving in her poem, and one of the major hints is her use of alliteration and assonance. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. He likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn. Yet when a child and barefoot, I more than once at morn have passed, I thought, a whiplash, unbraiding in the sun. When stooping to secure it, it was wrinkled and was gone. Several of nature's people I know, and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality, but never met this fellow attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and zero at the bone. Right now, she's repeating certain sounds throughout here. In addition to trying to explain it, these sounds are helping to try to get you a feeling for what she's talking about. First she tells you, this person, this thing she's talking about is in the grass. She runs into it occasionally in the grass, and it appears quickly and is gone quickly. A boggy acre, okay, boggy is kind of swampy, wet ground. But it also likes to go where things are cool, on stone, wooden floors, really like cellars or getting under porches. And she tells you a story about when she was a child and she was out barefoot. And often in the morning, she thought she saw something go whoosh, whipping by, and it was so fast she couldn't grab it. Now, this stanza is the one most people have trouble with. Several of nature's people, she's talking about animals, I know and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality, means she likes them. But never met this fellow attended or alone, without a tighter breathing, meaning she catches her breath, and zero at the bone. I mean, it chills her to see this thing. Okay, so what is she talking about? Here's where the alliteration really should tie it down for you. A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. She's emphasizing this S and F sound. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. See how she's doing that? You should have figured it out by now. If you haven't, she's talking about a snake. Allusion. We've talked about allusion already. This is referring to something that the reader should be familiar with. Often it's the Bible or something that happened in history or something that's politically important. Of course, you guys probably don't watch Survivor anymore, but at the time I made the slideshow, people were watching Survivor a lot. So here we have the Penguins making a reference to the TV show Survivor. Looks like Oswald just got voted off the island. Okay. Oh, irony, irony. Irony's a little difficult to explain. Irony is usually set up to make us think one direction and then does a twist at the end. But it's not just a simple, unexpected ending. It's kind of like tragedy in the sense that The characters in the story set up what happens at the end. They create the problem. Alanis Morissette did a song about irony, what's ironic about it is that she doesn't understand what irony is. For instance, one of her lines says, it's like rain on your wedding day. Rain on your wedding day is not ironic. It's just bad luck. Right? You can't control the weather. You can't plan for that. Irony is the fire department burning down. These are the people who are supposed to be preventing fires, and then their house burns down. There's something ironic in that. So, irony often is mocking something or making fun of something. We will see many examples of irony. There's actually a little bit of irony running through Pleasantville. Mask of the Red Death was very ironic. They went to all that work to hide away from the Red Death, and it got them anyway. It's ironic that no matter how hard you try, you can't avoid death. Onomatopoeia is just using words that imitate sound. They really have no other meaning. So, swish, woo 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 woo, boink. They have no meaning other than to imitate a sound. Satire, this is where we ridicule something, usually to try to draw people's attention to how bad a problem has gotten. We see this a lot on Saturday Night Live or the late shows. They love to use satire, especially when talking about the president. Like this particular cartoon, the Richmond Police, which their situation was just as bad as Baltimore City. So, have the police driving around saying, hey, look, it's nice to see the city council's finally doing something about violence. They're trying to get Batman. Hyperbole is a deliberate overstatement, and President Trump is very good at hyperbole. Typical examples of hyperbole are saying things, I just saw a rat as big as a house. There's no such thing as a rat as big as a house. Okay? Rats only get so big. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Really? You're going to eat an entire horse? So you see that it's an exaggeration. Trump loves to exaggerate. I have the world's best memory, and that everybody knows that. Really? Everybody knows about your wonderful, amazing memory? And scientifically it's been proven that your memory is better than everybody else's? So, yeah. Hyperbole is, without a doubt, the single greatest thing in the history of the universe. Poets like to use hyperbole, actually, for humor effect. To try to make fun of something, often for satire. A metaphor, I'm fairly sure that you've all learned what a metaphor is by this point in time. It's making a comparison, but not using like or as. So, it usually uses is or are, was or were. Like little Calvin here saying, they say the world is a stage. Okay, and then he tries to understand what that means. I can never pronounce this. Metonymy. We've seen this already. It's a form of symbolism where we use something closely associated with something else to use as a symbol. So, in this particular case, the artist is not very good at drawing the president. So, instead of trying to draw the president, he draws the White House, and then has the White House talking. The White House is representing the president. Often sports, they'll use a particular ball to represent the sports player, or a helmet or something like that to represent the player. Different things like that will come up. An oxymoron, I love oxymorons. Oxymorons are contradictions of terms, and it's funny, they've been showing up a lot lately in the news and especially in advertising. They're just two terms that you don't think normally should go together. I mean, when you think about them, they make sense, but at the same time, they don't make sense. Bittersweet, well, which is it? Is it bitter or is it sweet? Well, it's really, in reality, we use that term to talk about something that is both. The living dead. Really? You're either dead or you're alive. You can't be both. But then how do you describe a zombie? They're undead. A known secret. Okay, it's not a secret anymore if it's known. if it's been spread around. You could call it a former secret, that would be more accurate. And I always love, this actually came from an ex-girlfriend of mine, the silence was deafening. Really? Personification, that's where we take human characteristics and we apply them to non-human things. We personify animals all the time, but more often personification is more accurately applied to non-living things. The heavens wept. No, it just rained. But that's a poetic way of expressing it, because it also expresses a feeling. So it's not just saying, well, it rained. No, the heavens wept. Well, we feel sad now. It was so bad that even the angels and God were crying. Fear knocked on the door. Whew. Can fear really knock on anything? No, but we're personifying, we're giving fear a human form, which makes it even scarier. A sky full of dancing stars. Stars don't dance. We blink and shift our head a little bit and make them look like they're moving, but they're really not. And of course here we have some singing and dancing fire. A simile, again, I hope that you understand what this is. It's a direct comparison using like or as. Ugly as sin, tall like a tree. Here we have sick as a dog. This one's a little harder. People struggle with this a little bit more, but it's run like the wind. Symbolism, we've talked about this again too. In fact, much of what we just talked about are symbols. And of course, symbols are used a lot in poetry. It's very rare to get a poem that doesn't have some kind of symbolism in it. And thus endeth the slideshow. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit here. See if I can find it. There we go. Let's take a look at good old Alanis Morissette's poem, or her song, Irony. You may be familiar with it, you may not. It came out in the 90s, and her album, Jagged Little Pill, was very popular at the time, and then sort of got overplayed and people got sick of it. But she had a song in there called Ironic. Isn't it ironic, don't you think? And she doesn't have a single proper example of irony in the whole song. So just in case you've never heard it before, I'm going to play a little snatch of it. Oh, don't do that. And it's not going to play now. Son of a gun. See if I can get it back open. Of course, this always happens. What happened to my... There, that's why it wouldn't play. Something happened to my... No, that's not it. The heck? That's not what I was trying to get. There we go.
An old man turned 98. He won the lottery, died the next day. It's a black fly in your Chardonnay. It's a death row pardon, 2 minutes too late. And isn't it ironic? Don't you think? It's like rain.
Okay, I have to shut it down because I know if I go any further, YouTube won't let me run this video. I probably have pushed it too far already. But simply, an old man wins the lottery and then dies the next day. There's nothing ironic about that. Ironic would be that he spent his whole life, wasted all his money on lottery tickets. To the point where he lost friends, family, loved ones, it just ruined his life. And then he finally hits the lottery and dies the next day. That's ironic. There has to be more to the story. Getting a black fly in your wine, who cares? It's just stupid. You should have been more careful. A death row pardon 2 minutes too late. Alright, you need to tell us the full story to understand how that's ironic. Okay? It's not ironic, it's just bad timing. Rain on your wedding day. Again, you can't predict that. A free ride when you've already paid for it. Oh, I paid for the taxi, and then I see the sign that says, if you're over 50, you get to ride for free. Ugh. Okay, that's just stupidity on your part. The good advice that you just didn't take. Again, you need more of a story to it to make it ironic. Right now, it's just, okay, I ignored good advice. For instance, here's this story. She gives us an entire verse about this guy. Mr. Play It Safe was afraid to fly. He packed his suitcase and kissed his kids goodbye. He waited his whole damn life to take that flight, and as the plane crashed down, he thought, well, isn't this nice? And isn't it ironic, don't you think? No, I don't think. I don't think it's ironic, because it's just bad luck that he got on a plane that's going to crash. Now, let's say that this was Mr. CEO of a major airline, and that he cut costs everywhere he could, including parts for his planes. So then one day he needs to go to a meeting, and his private jet is down for repairs, so he goes ahead and takes a commercial flight with all his regular customers, and this particular flight, they're going across country when an engine catches fire, and then another engine catches fire. And why are they catching fire? Because he used cheap parts. So as the plane crashes down, he says, well, this is the price I pay for being cheap. That's ironic, okay? So as you look through here, she's not really giving you examples of irony, and so that's what makes this song ironic, is that she doesn't understand irony. The one thing that is true in the whole song is that life has a funny way of sneaking up on you when you think everything's okay and everything's going right. And life has a funny way of helping you out when you think everything's gone wrong and everything blows up in your face. Again, though, that's not irony, but it is true that things are going bad, life will look for a way of kicking you in the butt and knock you down some more. But if you also pay attention, life will also find ways to try to help you out. So you can look at this yourself a little bit more. I'll post it on the daily agenda so you can read the whole thing. But it just amazes me how people throw things around, and this happens all the time in our society. People throw around terms and think they understand what they're talking about when they really don't, and it makes them look dumb. It's actually been happening an awful lot in the news lately. Okay, so we actually done that one already, so get that out of there. We've done that one. Okay, now I want to show you an example of how to analyze a poem. So let's, there we go. So let's just stick with Edgar Allan Poe. We know a lot about Poe, so that'll make this a little bit easier for you. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, which is also fairly important. He wrote that while he lived here in Baltimore, just a little south of us, and he wrote this before his wife came down with tuberculosis. So it's rather ironic that he's almost foreseeing what's going to happen to him in just a few short years. Oh, I forgot one thing. Tell you what, I'm going to make this a separate video. Hang on.